Welcome everyone to this webinar on developing archaeological audiences for inclusion. We're very pleased you could join us this evening. My name is Tiva Montalbano. I'm Senior Advisor for Cultural Heritage and Strategic Projects at Wessex Archaeology. We're being supported behind the scenes today by Beth Harrison and Polly Bowerman from our engagement and comms teams. And our keynote speaker is Lee Chalmers, Wessex Archaeology's Heritage Inclusion Manager. I'll tell you more about Lee in a minute, excuse me, but first let's do some housekeeping. So about this session, next slide, please. It's 90 minutes long. It'll mostly be led by Lee, with a few of us dipping in and out when we do the interactives. There will be a 5-minute screen break at the halfway mark, about 6:45 p.m. if we can keep to time. We'll aim to finish about 7:30. The webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to Wessex Archaeology's YouTube channel, and we will add subtitles. There are, or should be, about 60 of you signed up for this webinar this evening, so for safety we have disabled your mics and cameras. You'll also see that GoToWebinar does not have a chat function for participants, but we have figured out a workaround, which is our interactives. We're going to use Vevox today, which is an internet-based interactive app, and it also has a chat function. So Beth is going to show you how to use that in a minute. Please be aware that the chat in Vevox is anonymous, so if you want to answer somebody else's question, or if you want us to know who's asking your question, please just identify yourself when you type in your message. Don't be shy, we really do want you to participate today. Vevox is really quite simple to use, it's pretty intuitive, but what I would say is you will need to open a new tab in your browser to use Vevox, and it might be a good idea to split the tabs so that you can see the GoToWebinar screen on one side and the Vevox page on the other, so you have them side by side. Apologies if your screen's a little small for that. The alternative is that you can actually use Vevox on another device like your smartphone, but we'll talk you through that in a minute. As for the webinar, at the end, we're going to signpost what the next steps will be. We'll include information on how to find out more about the AAN and what the next event in the series is going to be, as well as what our long-term aspirations are for this program. Finally, to send you off into the night, we're going to show you a 5-minute video from our lockdown project, which is called 1000 Stories Lost and Found, How to Run Your Own Wellbeing Project. If we are running out of time and you need to move on, that's absolutely fine. We'll send you the link to the video when we send you the slides for the presentation. So, can I have the next slide, please? Just a bit of background about us and why we're all here. This webinar is being hosted by Wessex Archaeology. Wessex has 40 years of experience delivering commercial archaeology services and educational activities across the UK. Our nearly 400 staff, based in our 5 UK and 2 international offices, have a deep expertise in delivering archaeological consultancy and excavation services on land and at sea. We have strong relationships with local and national government bodies, as well as infrastructure organisations and the wider commercial construction industry. We are one of the largest archaeology units in the UK, but what a lot of people don't realise is that we are also an educational charity. In fact, we were a charity first, before we became a business. And that's why we're all here today. Wessex Archaeology is investing heavily in generating more public benefit from the archaeology that we do. We're actively developing ways to demonstrate the profound social value of archaeology and our work and expertise as archaeologists. We've developed some award-winning education, engagement, inclusion, and wellbeing projects over the years, both in person and online, and there's a lot more to come. You'll hear about some more of that today. About the AAN, this workshop is the second in a series of events by the Archaeology Audience Network, which is a strategic collaboration started in 2021 between some of the largest and most forward-thinking archaeological not-for-profits in the UK. These include Wessex Archaeology, Museum of London Archaeology, who are the project lead, Dig Ventures, York Archaeology, Oxford Archaeology, the Council for British Archaeology, and the Archaeology Data Service. To find out more about the AAN and sign up for updates, please visit the MOLA website or follow #ArchaeoAN on Twitter and Facebook. Polly's going to paste the link to the mailing list in the GoToWebinar chat now, and we will send it to you after this event as well. The AAN is funded by the DCMS and the NLHF under the Digital Skills for Heritage initiative. Our aim is to build a community of practice to aggregate, learn from, and improve how we use audience data to achieve more meaningful impacts in public and community archaeology. We're going to do this by pooling our existing audience and evaluation data, delivering a series of training events and activities, both online and in person, and also through a series of pilot projects designed to find ways to reach new and broader audiences. Audience data is actually the cornerstone of this program. We're hoping to build the most accurate picture to date of who the audiences for public and community archaeology are, as well as who they could be. We'll be making this data freely available, and we'll be producing a toolkit to help others to work more efficiently and strategically to collect, interrogate, and generate impact from their audience data. And in that vein, I'd like to tell you a little bit about yourselves. Next slide, please. Now, you may remember that when you registered for this event, we asked you a whole bunch of questions. Well, Polly has done a bit of number crunching on the data, and here's what we've learned about you so far. You've told us where you're located, so we have a really interesting heat map of where you are in the world, and it's not just the UK this evening. You've also told us that you're representing your employers, if you have one, or you might be here in a personal capacity. And you've told us what motivated you to sign up for this webinar. That's been quite interesting as well. You've also told us how much experience and confidence you have in developing, delivering, and evaluating heritage inclusion projects. And here's the interesting bit. We set up an afternoon and an evening session, hoping to cater to two slightly different types of audience and make the webinar more available to more people. Our expectation was that practitioners and people involved in heritage would come to the day session, and that people who were more like volunteers, freelancers, and students, people with a personal interest, would come to the evening session. That expectation turned out to be largely correct. We'd also expected that more people would sign up for the evening session than the afternoon session. This turned out to be completely wrong. We had about 80 people sign up for the afternoon session and about 60 for the evening session. We made an assumption that the levels of experience and confidence in delivering heritage inclusion projects would probably be higher in the afternoon session, the one with the majority of practitioners, than the evening session, the one with more people who you could consider volunteers or personally interested people. But the data actually tells us the opposite. The people in the evening session identify as slightly more experienced and more confident than the people in the afternoon session, which to us was a bit of a surprise. At the moment, and we will interrogate this a bit more, it looks like there is more demand and interest in this topic amongst practitioners that we reach through our comms than any other type of audience. So our assumptions are completely wrong, and the data is showing us actually something new to think about. So this then takes us back to our comms approach. Are we targeting the right places with our event information? Are we doing it at the right time? Is there a correlation between the platforms we've been using and the times we've posted and what kind of people have signed up? These are all the kinds of questions we've been able to use the data to find answers to, and just a few of the quite revealing insights that we've gleaned from what you have told us so far. Now, we're hoping to do a lot more of this, especially when you hopefully give us lots of feedback after the session is over. Now, we're not going to talk too much today about data. We're also going to avoid long discussions about social theory or evaluation, because those are basically 90-minute webinars of their own. Today's session is designed to help you to think about how to diversify your audiences by sharing practical tips on how to have a more inclusive approach to your engagement projects. And this will be illustrated with some really memorable case studies. We're going to think about how to reach audiences who might ordinarily be excluded, or indeed choose to exclude themselves from our engagement activities, and identify what we can do to ensure that those activities work with and for them. By the end of this session, you'll have a better idea of how you can make your archaeological engagement activities more inclusion focused or even inclusion led. You'll know how to get started, and we hope that you'll have more confidence to design, develop, and deliver inclusion focused projects of your own. So now you know who we are and what we're all doing here. Let me introduce you to the wonderful Lee Chalmers, Wessex Archaeology's Heritage Inclusion Manager. Lee is not an archaeologist. Her background is in arts and heritage participation, and over her extensive career in Wiltshire, she has worked with groups in museums, schools, places of worship, prisons, hospitals, and lots of other third sector organisations. She specialises in working alongside people and providing them with opportunities to socialise and learn and create. Her projects are all about using heritage and culture to create experiences that are meaningful to individuals. When not working for Wessex, Lee spends time with her family. She also heads up the team at TEDx Salisbury and volunteers at Salisbury Mind. So without further ado, over to you, Lee.
Thank you, Tiva. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our session this evening. My name is Lee, as Tiva said, and I've worked at Wessex Archaeology since early 2020 as their Heritage Inclusion Manager. Prior to working at Wessex, I worked at Salisbury Cathedral, and I've lived in the city of Salisbury for almost 18 years now. I've been working in the field of community engagement, well-being and mental health for almost 30 years. Today's session is about understanding what we need to consider when developing heritage projects for audiences with access, inclusion, or wellbeing needs. In the time we have, I can give you an overview, which I hope you will find useful when considering your own projects and work with underserved and underrepresented groups in your own communities. What I will share with you is the way in which I go about doing this. So this is a little bit of my experience of working as a creator, a producer, a project manager, facilitator, and as an evaluator. As Tiva said, this talk is not driven by data or statistics. In fact, I'm not going to share one single stat with you. Instead, I'm going to share some of the stories that I've collected over the years and give you a glimpse into the people behind the data. But before we begin, we're going to have a practice on our first interactive moment of the session. This is a chance for you to practice VVox that Tiva mentioned earlier. So the question one is, what is it about archaeology that makes for good community engagement projects? I'm going to hand over to Beth now, and she's going to talk you through how to use this platform. Hello, Beth.
Hi, Lee. Thanks for passing over to me. You should be able to see on your screen now a QR code. So you can scan this QR code if you are using a mobile phone or a tablet to join. You can just scan the code and it'll take you straight to the browser window. The other option is going to vvox.app in your browser and entering the ID number, which is up on the screen as well. It's 143160013, and that'll take you to the same place as the QR code. I'll just give everyone a few seconds to do that, and then I'll show you how to use VVox. Okay, so I'll just show you what you should be seeing. So whether you're on your phone or your browser, you should see this page here. You can see there's two tabs up at the top. One is the home page. This is where the polls and word clouds and things like that will be. You don't have to do anything to start those. I'll start them and they'll just pop up for you. The other tab up at the right here is the chat and Q&A function. So this is where we'll be chatting during the webinar. So if you want to start off, if you want to have a practice, you can introduce yourselves here if you'd like to introduce yourselves to everyone. You can also like posts that people put up. So if there's a question, comment or observation that you particularly like or agree with, you can like it and we can see what people are kind of connecting with. So do feel free to put introductions in there. I'll give you a few seconds for that.
I'm just going to jump in and say, when you do see a question in the chat that you like and you would like to see answered, please like it and upvote it so that we can see it when we find it at the end of the session and we do a Q&A.
Okay, brilliant. So we're getting a few people introducing yourselves, which is great. Hi, Claire, Kat and Nick. And it looks like most people are getting the hang of liking as well. So you should be able to list by most liked and the most recent as well. So should we start the first word cloud?
Let's do it.
Just start it on here for you. So if you're on the home tab on VVox, it should pop up automatically for you. This is going to be a word cloud, so you can enter multiple answers, but you have a 20-character limit, so you've got to be quite short with your answers. The question, just to read it again, is what is it about archaeology that makes for good community engagement projects? So because this is a word cloud, if you see an answer that you think is a good one, you can enter it again, and the more people write the same answer, the bigger it will get. So we can see which we consider the most important thing about archaeology that makes it good. So as you can see, a few people have put passion in already, so that's getting bigger, so that's really helpful.
Oh, what's that? Empathy? That's a nice one.
I like that passion is big. That makes me happy. Connector looks like it's getting bigger, and local interest as well. Yeah, I think one thing we probably all have in common here is that, we all love to share our passion and interest in archaeology with other people. And that's what makes archaeological engagement such an important part of what we do. And such a fun part as well.
And human connection there, that's a lovely
Empathy,
reason,
that's a
actually.
good one.
Absolutely.
Let's give you guys about 20 more seconds, and then I think we should probably move on. This is looking good. Fun, of course, fun. Cooperative, definitely. Communicate, story engagement. Yeah, I'm surprised storytelling isn't on here yet. That's one that we've seen quite a bit. Maybe it'll come on in a minute.
These are great.
We can see in the top right-hand corner of the screen that about 20 of you are currently engaged with this. So that's a really good little statistic for us. Sense of place. That's a really important one. That's one that I'm working on in other thing. All right, let's move on, everybody. I think you've got the hang of it.
Yep, these are brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Beth, I'll take the screen back from you when you're ready. Thank you very much. Okay. So this was my answer. Why archaeology? As someone who's not an archaeologist, I'm blown away by how it is this never-ending resource. And so with that, there is never-ending learning. And within that, there are never-ending possibilities to what we can do with it and how we can use it to engage with people. So what do we mean by inclusion? Well, here are 3 explanations about the meaning of the word inclusion. And I think the one in the middle is a pretty good place to start. This says, the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalised, such as those who have physical or mental disabilities and members of other minority groups. But take a look at this slide. Diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. I think that's pretty good, isn't it? That gives you a really good visual image to conjure up in your head, which makes this quite accessible as a concept. However, we can improve on this. Look at that. Better yet, inclusion is organising the party together. And that's the aim, folks. That's what we're looking for. We're looking to organise a party together. How do we work in our communities and how do we stand alongside people to enable them to work with us to create projects and moments together that speak to their needs, their interests and their identity? Why do we want to be inclusive? Well, because it's important. It's important in many ways for people, for organisations and for society. It's about being relevant. It's about representation. And for us as heritage organisations, it's about recognising the benefits engaging with heritage and archaeology can have on individuals and on communities. It brings long-term organisational benefits, such as financial benefits, reputational benefits, and sustainability. And of course, we understand that it isn't and should never be about a tick box exercise. Many organisations are now realising that by putting inclusion needs at the core of all decision making makes for a healthier and happier organisation and a healthier and happier community. The Holborn Museum in Bath is an absolutely excellent example of this. Their wonderful Pathways to Wellbeing programme has been funded for several years now by National Lottery Community Fund. And this year that funding will finish, but Pathways will continue. The museum absolutely recognises how vital the programme is to the community and to them as an organisation. They are putting this work at the heart of what they do. Let's take a look at what 3 cultural organisations have to say about inclusivity and their expectations around this. So the National Lottery Heritage Fund. The very first and one mandatory aim of this fund is about inclusivity. A wider range of people will be involved in heritage. And look at the words they're using here. They're talking about audience development, community consultation, and tracking changes. Arts Council England, in their Inclusivity and Relevance document, have set out their ambition for communities. They want to ensure the sector is actively listening to and taking account of the views of the local community. They want organisations to actively form relationships with underserved communities. And Historic England. Here they talk about diverse groups of people, inclusivity and collaboration, reflecting communities and partnerships. So these are the words I want you to be thinking about over the course of this webinar. It's people, communities, relationships, partnerships, and collaboration. So how do we reach out? Where do we get our participants from? In these next two slides, I'm showing you the foundations. This is the root system upon which I build up a community project. And the first thing I do is I go out into the community and I meet people and I get to know them. And I understand what their needs are and what matters to them as individuals, what they're interested in, and what challenges they might face. And we work in this way to build up a positive relationship and trust. Now, trust is a really important thing to recognise because for lots of individuals, this might be a challenge for them. I think one of the best bits of feedback I had on the Lost and Found course was from one of the participants who said that it felt genuine. He said, I felt that you wanted us all to be there, Lee, so I trusted you. In order to have these conversations in the community, I need to understand who the gatekeepers are. And these are often the third sector organisations and the voluntary organisations, such as your community engagement team at your local council, or the parish vicar, or the local older people's champion. And my relationship with them is also built on trust. And actually, over the years of working alongside them, I'm now in a position where they come to me to instigate projects and suggest ideas and ways in which we might work together. A gentle reminder though, your community gatekeepers are a brilliant asset, but the best asset is absolutely the people themselves. The key, I think, to the success of all of these relationships is around listening and learning and understanding who is not engaging. You also really need to understand what's happened before and what's already going on in your community. And if you can, try and look through a different lens. Years and years ago, when my children were small, I led a staff training session around enabling environments at the children's nursery. And one of the things I did was to film the journey into the nursery from the car park, but from the height of a 3-year-old. So I filmed the walk across the car park, through the gates, alongside the side of the building, to the front door, then into the building and then into each of the rooms. And outside of the building, all the children were faced with were barriers, physical barriers, gates, walls, doors, fences. And everything looked really, really scruffy. But from an adult height, you didn't notice any of this. When I showed the film to the staff at the training session, they all cried. Making them cry was not my intention, but they had no idea, none of us did actually, what it felt like if you were little and you were doing that walk into the building every day, just how unwelcoming it was. And so we changed it pretty much immediately. We put perspex panels and little secret doors in the gates. We put a mirror on the front door, and we created a lovely sensory trail that ran along the outside of the building so the children could run their fingers along it as they walked past. We worked really hard to improve that experience for them, and it worked. Children who had previously struggled coming into the building now enjoyed the experience, as we had created something that improved their access and made them feel included. We were no longer just catering for their adults. This example, I think, gives a sense of how important it is to try and step outside of what you think people's experiences are and to make an effort to appreciate what life is actually like for them. And the last one on listen and learn is working on ideas together, that continuous co-creation. And of course, you're going to do this because remember, the aim is to organise this party together and then invest the time. You need to be prepared for how long this might take, but I promise you, this investment of your time is absolutely going to pay off. So let's just summarize this. You have to get the foundations of your project in place. Think of it as the roots from a tree, which is underpinned by your great idea. The roots are what supports the tree, and you need to have that in place in order for your project to grow. And as we said, growing something does take time. One of the things I've been tasked at doing at Wessex Archaeology is to consider how we roll out our heritage wellbeing offer across our 5 regional offices. So in order to do this task justice, I've seconded to my team 2 members of staff. I've got Natalia from the Edinburgh office and Natasha from Sheffield. And they're working hard to drill down into the needs of their communities and get in at that boots on the ground level. They're making connections, they're becoming active members of the community, they're building up trust, and they're working alongside people to identify places where they might be able to do good work together. They've been doing this for just 1 day a week for the past 3 months, and between them, they've made 14 viable community connections, given 3 presentations, and identified 6 potential projects with project partners. And most importantly, they are meeting with members of the community. This is a really lovely quote from Wiltshire Centre for Independent Living, who I've worked with on a couple of projects now. And rather conveniently, they put this out on Twitter on Monday, which was perfect timing on their part. They said, co-production is a way of working together whereby everybody comes together to create positive change. Disabled people are credited as experts and assets, local change makers who are able to influence design and develop how their community and everything in it works for them. Wiltshire SIL work alongside people in the county with disabilities, and they support them to live independently through individual choice, control and equal rights. And as you can see from this quote, just how much they champion that co-production and how valuable that experience is for the people that they work alongside. Okay, so the second question for you today is in 2 parts. The first part is, when setting up an inclusion project, what are the barriers you face? And we'll use that word cloud, I think, to overcome that, to identify that. And then the second question is, how do you overcome these? So it's a 2-part question. I'm going to hand you back to Beth, and you're going to use Vevox again to engage with this.
So, as Lee said, this is the next question, and it is a word cloud. So you get multiple answers, but short answers, remember? If you get kicked out of Vevox or you accidentally closed it or anything like that, you can just rejoin, and it should work automatically for you. So do rejoin if you closed it. I'll just show the real results as they're coming in.
Imposter syndrome just appears every single time. Please don't feel like you've got imposter syndrome. I think we all have that though, don't we?
We do a little bit. Time is an interesting one. I think we've heard that as well, haven't we, Lee? Because people are really pressed for time. And the thing is that this requires quite a time investment, this sort of working. Funding
Finding
is
new
there
folk.
as well.
Yeah, funding, that old chestnut. Reaching the right folks and finding new people, absolutely.
Communication, that's an interesting one, as in it's difficult to communicate with the communities, or is it difficult to communicate within your organization when you're trying to reach out to the communities? Is it that you don't know how, or what the best way is? We had that in the previous session. People were asking, what's the best way to make your approach, which is something we can maybe discuss in the chat, in the Q&A later.
Time is there, yeah, we've said that one.
Negative
Time to listen.
attitude. Negative attitudes is an interesting one. I think that might have been written by someone who works for a commercial archaeology unit.
Travel anxiety. Yep, absolutely.
Biases of funders. Again, that's something I think we might want to pick up in the Q&A, because a lot of people have been asking us about, what do funders want? Do they see this as worthwhile work? Funding, yeah, funding's getting bigger.
Doing it wrong. Buy-in from others. They're all good.
Keeping it free. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff connected to how this gets paid for, isn't there?
To money. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's give it about 10 more seconds. Chuck in any more ideas you've got, or pick ones that you like and type them in to make them get bigger. And the next step is going to be to really have a proper look at this word cloud and then pick one or two of those barriers that you think you know a suggestion for how to overcome, because that's where we're going to go next.
Yeah, this is our nice little bit of peer-to-peer support here, people, where we can help each other problem solve some of these.
Okay, are you ready to close this one and move on?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. We'll close
Thanks,
it
Beth.
there. So before I move on, if you just have a little look at some of the answers we've got there, when we move on to the next question, you'll only be able to send one answer. So you might want to pick one or two of the comments made in the word cloud and answer those next. So we'll move on now. So this question is, how might we overcome these barriers? And with this one, you can send a longer answer. So you have a much longer character limit, but you can only send one.
Are people stumped?
I think
There we
people are
go.
probably thinking a lot about their answers.
Yeah.
Confidence is a big one. Just got to be brave sometimes, haven't you?
Building trust, absolutely. Gatekeepers and stakeholders, yep, for sure.
Making the benefits clear, making the case, that's going to be a really important one, I think, to persuading both your employers, your gatekeepers, your decision makers, and the funders as well. Immersion in the community. Yep, if you don't know who they are, find out. I was thinking about this earlier today, actually, and Lee, we talked about this. Sometimes a way to approach a community group that you want to be involved with is to figure out how anybody else would join that community group. How do they find out how to join and attend? Take a courageous step. I like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Be brave.
Dedication and willingness to change. That's a good one. Oh, look at that. We did a pottery Zoom session and delivered clay to homes of participants. Oh my goodness, I love that.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yes, that's excellent.
That's definitely overcoming the transport barriers, isn't it? And the access barriers. That's one way of doing it.
I also really love ask for forgiveness, not permission. It's similar to, that's kind of similar to make good trouble, which is one of my life's mantras. These are brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
We're ready to move on?
Let's move on. Thank you so much for participating in that. These are all really useful, actually. Thanks,
Do
Beth.
feel free to continue the conversation in the chat if you like. And again, if you start to come with any questions, stick them in there and we'll get to them later on.
Okay,
thanks, Beth. I'll take the screen back from you. Thank you so much. Let's move on. Partnerships. So I don't know if anyone put partnerships in there as one of the possible solutions, but I really love partnership working. And again, there is so much to be gained from working in partnerships with other organisations. And for me, what this often means is other heritage and cultural organisations, but also third sector orgs, just like Wiltshire SIL. During the Lost and Found project back in 2020, we worked with 8 project partners, 5 of which were third sector orgs. Your partners might also be your gatekeepers, and they're going to have the specialism and a different skill set, and they are going to add value to your project. You're going to learn from working with them, and they're going to learn from working with you. And I love that because this is a wonderful exchange of knowledge. And working in partnership will open up channels of connection and communication There is a ripple effect to this way of working, and your project will absolutely be better as a result. Our big partnership project at the moment is our social prescribing project called Wells City Salisbury. This is a 3-year funded National Lottery Community Fund partnership that sees us working with Wiltshire Creative, and they host our arts centre and our theatre, the Salisbury Museum and Art Care, who are based up at the hospital. And between us, we offer 8 creative courses a year that play to the strengths of our individual organisations. And in years 2 and 3, we're adding in a pathway route that involves being mentored by volunteers. I spent just under 3 years working on this project before we got the funding. This was not 3 years full time, I hasten to add, and we did have Novichok and COVID to contend with too, but nonetheless, it was quite a lengthy process. And this process involved community research, co-creation, networking, piloting ideas, evaluation, reflection, trying out new ideas, and addressing all of the questions and the feedback that we got from the funders. And in May last year, we got the funding. These images on your screen are from our current course, which is called Earthworks, which sees us working with a textile artist as well as our own experts. And these are pictures of the water meadows. So we took a walk last week out in the water meadows, which was possibly the wettest day of the year so far. And we used the LiDAR images to kind of map our route around the water meadows to kind of identify where we were. It's been, and it is, I'm halfway through the project now. I did session 5 yesterday with the group. It is such a joyful experience, and the participants are getting so much out of it. So let's summarise what we know so far, because this is going to inform our next steps. You work alongside people to identify their needs and interests in order to co-create work that is inclusive and meaningful to them. This in turn allows your organisation to have a positive impact on the person and on their community. So what comes first? Is it the project idea or is it the need? Well, one thing's for sure, if one is missing, it's not going to work. I think it is absolutely fine to have a flash of genius, to come up with that brilliant idea for an engagement project before you identify exactly which group or groups in your community you might like to work with. And you know what? This is going to happen because you're surrounded by the thing that stimulates you the most, and you're driven by a desire to share this more widely because you understand how people might benefit from the engagement. I have ideas weekly. Not all of them are genius. Some of them are just utterly ridiculous. But I do have a little collection of project concepts that are just on the back burner. They're just waiting for that right moment to be developed and moulded by community partners and participants. And incidentally, some of these little dormant projects would sit rather nicely within our commercial work too. Okay, so what's going to follow now on the next few slides are various checklists. Some of them are quite lengthy, but we will be sending the slide deck out, so please don't feel the need to write down every word that you see on here. Ideally, we could spend 90 minutes on each point, but not today. And for some of you, you may already know this and be doing this as part of your practice. So this is adapting your practice before a course. Training, policies and procedures, it goes without saying, get these in place before you begin. Wellbeing risk assessments, an awareness of likely issues, signposting support, staff training again. This is about giving yourself a heads up and ensuring that you have the resources in place to support people. So for example, a list detailing the names and phone numbers of mental health organisations that offer online support might be a useful resource to have. Setting people up to succeed, understanding their access needs. You want people to flourish on your course or project, so you need to consider how you enable them to do so. I'm going to give you an example of when this nearly went wrong for me. So a few years ago, I ran a bookbinding course for a group of people with mental health needs I'd been working alongside for a few years. And who knew, but bookbinding, it turns out, is really, really hard. And even though I'd given the team leading the session instructions about how to make it accessible, the group really struggled. And I had this awful realization about 10 minutes into the session that they might not be able to do it. and that for the first time of me working with them, I had set them a task that was actually too hard. I knew things were going wrong when the gentlest, quietest member of the group just said, "Lee, this is making me really, really angry." So in that moment, we just had to make changes to what we were doing. I made 8 books that day. I sat alongside each individual and I helped them make sense of the instructions and of the task. And when they left, they were delighted with what they've done. Do you know what? In fact, I think the fact that it was harder made them even prouder of the achievement. I, however, was a wreck in the corner. I don't think I've ever worked so hard to save a session. So word of caution, avoid bookbinding at all costs. Care for everyone involved in the project. So that's the team, it's the volunteers, it's the facilitators, and it's the participants. This is a holistic approach. You have a duty of care to everyone that you're working with. You're going to deal with the whole person. Remember, a person's needs is just a part of who they are. It's not their entirety. And access points. So we have archaeology, cultural, creative, physical, academic, and many more not listed. The wonderful thing about archaeology is that it does allow for different access points. And what I mean by that are ways to hook someone in without it being overtly about the archaeology. So for example, if your course involves photography or walking in the landscape, then these might be the primary motivations for a person to join. And then it's a gentle way for them to find out more about the archaeology. And space. So space and projects to share and be listened to, and space to make changes for the benefits of the participants. Let me give you a quick example of making space. So I don't pack my projects full of twists and turns. They are all really simple ideas, and they grow and they change as people breathe into them and kind of make them their own. Dig In is our archaeology wellbeing cafe. I take out into the community and I deliver it from a local cafe once a month. People attend free of charge. They buy a coffee, they have a chat, they make new friends, and they listen to a gentle 15-minute talk about heritage or archaeology. It's really simple. At the first cafe last September, we had 19 people, and at last month's there were just under 40. One man takes 2 trains to attend, and because of the train times, he arrived late for the first 2 cafes and he missed the start of those talks. So now I've changed the start time of the talk so he gets to hear all of it. He told me that his wife died last year and coming to Dig In was the highlight of his month. In May, we can't use the cafe space, so we're having a dig in day out. We're going to meet in the local park for a picnic instead, and the group are going to choose what the talk will be about. We might even add in a little walk. The fact that Dig In is so simple allows me to make all of these changes and all of these amendments really, really easily. A few more things for you to consider before a course. The right team and the right training. I am so lucky at Wessex Archaeology. The teams I'm working with there are absolutely magnificent, and I could not do any of my projects without their support because I'm not an archaeologist, I'm a facilitator and a creator of this work. But this work isn't everyone's bag, so try and ensure that the teams supporting you are happy to do so. Consider scale versus intensity. So lots of my projects tend to be relatively low numbers, say 12 to 15 participants, but I might work with them from anywhere from 2 to 6 months. Representation. This is an interesting one, isn't it? Because in a sector that is, I think, 98% white British, I don't know how we achieve this. But I think it's important to be mindful of it and important to be working hard to do something about it. And what's the appropriate way to measure the success of your project? Do you need to evaluate it? What evaluation framework will you use? How will you creatively involve the participants in this process? And pathways and signposting. What else is going on in your community that people might be interested in? Is there a way in which they can stay connected to your organisation and gain more from doing so? And how are you going to manage the end? Because endings can be really tricky. And this is something you need to give careful consideration to. Okay, so during a course or project, there are things that you need to be aware of and actively doing. So another checklist for you. So stay connected. You know this. Keep on checking in with people. How was your day? Are you okay? Is there anything I need to be aware of? Keep that communication going. You might like to consider creating a group charter. So this is a set of guidelines that everyone agrees to. So it's things like we listen to each other, we respect each other's opinions, we are kind towards each other. And if you involve the group in this process, then they're going to have ownership over it and they're going to feel empowered. You're going to give people the opportunity to make the right choices for them. On our first Well City course, one of our participants actually left after 3 weeks as she realised that the course actually wasn't for her at all. And she felt so much happier as a result of making this choice. So in my eyes, that was a success. And what's the learning? What are you noticing over the duration of the course? Invite your participants to reflect and feed back to you. Are any of those wonderful unexpected outcomes starting to emerge? And think about the mechanism for people feeding back. Are you setting time aside to check in and check out with people? And please don't make assumptions about people's limitations, because people know their own capabilities. A few years ago now, I facilitated a stone carving course, and one of the participants on that had a vision impairment. Now, prior to the course, we had a conversation about whether or not it would work for her. She said to me, Lee, I really want to do your course. Will you have me? And I said, well, yeah, of course I'll have you. And we just put the necessary supports in place for her to attend. She still talks about that conversation as being a transformational moment for her, because she had been turned down for so many things that she felt perfectly capable of doing so often before. In fact, just recently, she was turned down from joining a local walking group. So don't make assumptions about what people can and can't do. They know what's best for them. If it's not working, change it. Think about my experience on the bookbinding course. You don't want to have that to happen. Please don't flog something if it's not going well, because this can be really damaging actually for all involved, and it's not necessary. And there's absolutely no shame in making a change. And the process is the important part. We all know this. It's the journey, not the destination. And it's true, actually, because it's within the process where those moments of change are going to take place. And once again, this isn't a mistake. I'm asking you again to think about this. How are you going to manage the end? Because for lots of people, this is the hardest bit. And sometimes something that they're going to start referring to fairly early on in your course. But your project has to end. And endings are a part of life, and it is absolutely okay for people to feel sad about them. But this is what I do to address some of those feelings around endings. So I program into the timeframes of my project a false ending. And what I mean by that is that 2 or 3 weeks after the main body of the project's finished, I hold a celebration and reflection session. So on week 5, when people start saying things like, we've only got 4 weeks left, I say, yeah, you've only got 4 weeks left of this creative session, but remember, you're going to come back again and we're going to celebrate and we're going to get together and we're going to eat cake. And this is a moment when I have these reflection sessions for the group to come together again. They socialize, they celebrate, they share stories, and they reflect on their experiences of the project. And I have to tell you, it's at this session where I often get those golden nuggets of evaluation and feedback. And I think that this is because people have had the time to reflect on what that experience has meant for them. Possibly they've shared it with friends and family. And mostly, this is a positive moment to get them all back together again. And finally, please also consider how you and your team might feel when something is finished. You might feel sad, you might feel exhausted, you probably will, relieved even, ready for the next challenge. Okay, as if by magic, we segue into our first ending. It's time for a screen break, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you've all managed to grab a drink and do a couple of star jumps and have a wiggle around. So let's carry on. Well-being within a course. This is another checklist. I do hope you're finding these useful. I'm sorry, they're just great big long lists of words. So well-being within a course, I have mentioned some of these before, and the reason they are repeated is because they're important. And I don't want you to think that you just do them just the once and then forget about them. but there are a few new ones in here and I'm going to pull those out for you. So give time for socializing. You know, for some people, coming to your course might be the only chance they have in their entire week to talk and meet to other people. So it is vital that you give people time for conversation, as this can be where that that important peer-to-peer support moment might kick in. And also people just want to catch up. You know, they haven't, maybe you're running a course over a duration of weeks and they haven't seen each other for a few days. It's nice to allow that moment. Listening. So this again is really, really important. For some people, this might be the most transformative thing that they need. Space to talk and for someone to actively listening to them. And there are training courses out there on active listening. I did one a few years ago with the Samaritans. Signposting and pathways we've talked about before, and reflection and evaluation. You know, think about how you're going to record, or even better still, get the people to record any positive changes they feel. And celebrate. This is so important. Celebrate everything. Celebrate the project, celebrate the people, celebrate their achievements, celebrate, the walk that you took in the rain. Just allow yourself the time to embrace the project. This impact pyramid, so this is something I worked on with museums specialist and evaluator Joe Graham just last year. And this shows the levels at which people engage with a project and the impact that engagement might have them. In my experience, I think I'll work a lot with a lot of people who sit in the top 2 levels, that lasting impact and life affirming, but all levels of impact on this pyramid are valuable. So this is a quote from a lady called Viv Gordon, who is a theatre maker and a mental health campaigner and a survivor activist. Now, I've known Viv for about 5 years now. She is an extraordinary person. And as part of Wells City Salisbury, we brought her in to deliver access and inclusion training for people with mental health needs. And she said this. She said, well-being puts the emphasis on the individual to fix themselves. So well-being on its own is not enough. It needs to be underpinned by access. And this really stuck with me because, we talk about well-being so easily now, like there is no effort involved in this. But of course, for some people, it takes a huge effort. That decision to actively leave your house, to step out of the front door, to go off, to meet a group of strangers, and potentially to spend 12 weeks in their company for the benefit of your well-being, that is a scary thing. So you have to have other structures in place to support people with this process. So this slide, I've spoken about this a few times now. What are access needs and why are they important? Well, they're important as they're part of the steps towards inclusivity and diversity. And listed here are some of the things that you need to consider when you're doing this. So what matters to you? What's important? So this is things like, these are my gender pronouns. I'm deaf in one ear. English is not my first language. I have a caring responsibility. Consider the language you use. So this isn't just about what languages people speak, but this is the words you use and they use, and individuals use words differently. So for example, I'm personally not overly keen on the phrase mental health issues, because I feel that the word issue suggests that a person has a problem and that somehow that's wrong. I much prefer to say mental health needs, as I think that's more inclusive, because we all have mental health needs, don't we? But you'll hear both phrases in equal measures, and not one phrase is going to suit everyone. So please just be mindful about language and the words that people use to describe themselves. Where are you meeting? This might seem obvious, but how do people get there? Can they afford to get there? Is there disabled parking? Is it on a bus route? What's the street lighting like at night time? And what time of the day are you delivering the course? As well as delivering courses 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, I've delivered courses in the evenings. I've done some courses at the weekends. I even delivered one course over Christmas and New Year because I recognize that for a lot of people, that's not a happy time for them. So just think about the 9 to 5 isn't possible for everyone. And the physical space. So again, what's the access like into that space? Is the sunlight? Do the windows open? Can you step outside and get some fresh air? Where are the toilets? All that sort of stuff's really important. Food and drink, people are going to need refreshments, so you need to consider cultural requirements and preferences. and providing reassurance. Now, this goes without saying, I know you're going to do this throughout the duration of your course. You're going to be warm, you're going to be welcoming, you're going to be supportive. And allowing people time to settle in. So during my Lost and Found course, which ran for 7 sessions in total, that was including the welcome session and including the celebration session, I had one participant who did not say a word until the 5th session. Now, bearing in mind that this was delivered digitally, he was really happy to join in, join us on the screen, and he'd just sit and listen and take it all in. He felt very comfortable in that space, and there was never any expectations on him. So when he did speak after all that time, it felt like a bit of a breakthrough moment for him. And if you timetable in a welcome session before your course starts, chances are you're going to find out a lot of the above, and you can put people's minds at rest from the outset. You're probably all going to recognize this. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Please do not underestimate how important those bottom 2 sections are. I have had people turn up to courses hungry, and my expectation is that that's going to increase. So when I'm setting up a space, I have a selection of drinks, I have fresh fruit, biscuits or pastries. I bring flowers in and I set the space up so it's welcoming and so it's enabling. So from the outset, I'm setting people up to succeed and I'm making them feel safe and comfortable. So our final question for you all today is this. What are the barriers to people participating in an inclusion project, and how might we overcome these? So Beth, for the last time today, it's over to you.
Okay, so this is the last word cloud. So the question is, what are the barriers to people participating in an inclusion project? And again, you can send multiple answers, but you only have a 20-character limit.
Yep, it's not for me. You know what? I hear that phrase quite a lot, actually.
Confidence is a big one too. A lot of people
for
are,
sure.
and I think threshold nervousness, was that, did I see that somewhere? Threshold anxiety.
Yeah, threshold anxiety.
Definitely.
Childcare, we had that one earlier, didn't we,
today.
as well?
Yeah. Or general caring responsibilities as well. It's not just children these days. Distance and transport. Transport came up a lot in the last one. People not being able to get somewhere or not being able to afford to get somewhere.
And these are things like, transport costs. If you are going to a funder, make sure you put the money in there for that. So on the Wells City course, we have money set aside for all of our participants should they need financial help with their travel expenses.
Confidence. It's interesting that confidence is a big one, and anxiety as well. I think that's probably connected to the "it's not for me" factor as well. People think, oh,
Absolutely.
no, I couldn't possibly do that.
Yeah. But again, Tiva, that's where those welcome sessions I find really, really work well, because people get a chance to meet you, and there's no expectation of them in that moment to do anything other than just say, hello, my name is, whatever their name might be. And then we can kind of troubleshoot maybe some of the things that they're feeling anxious about.
I'm interested in the idea of classism. I think that's probably an interesting barrier as well, because sometimes archaeology and the study of history and local history can be perceived as a very middle class or upper middle class thing. And we know that that's not exclusively the case, but it's just a question of how do we get people to cross that threshold.
Absolutely. And again, that's where I think those access points come in really handy, actually. A different way to invite people to engage.
All right, well, I think
These
it's time for you guys
to
start fixing on one or two of these issues that you think you might have a suggestion for, because I think it's probably time to move to the next question. So have a look and have a little think about these ones, and we're going to pose the next question to you now. I think people are thinking quite hard.
Good thinking's going on. Taster sessions, yeah, absolutely. Online provision for sure.
Yep,
I mean, if,
very
you
accessible.
know, lockdown's taught us that, hasn't it?
No prior knowledge is required. That's a really important one, I think, which prevents a lot of people from coming through the door.
Partnership with a trusted provider, absolutely, 100% that.
Have people on your team who participants can identify with. I think that's a really important one. If your participants see people like them, that's a challenge for us in this sector, but I think it's one that we really need to embrace.
Absolutely, that's that whole representation question, isn't it?
Funding for transport, minibus pickups, yes. Diversity in the publicity literature. This is good stuff.
Yeah, this is great stuff. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate that. And we hope that you have found that exercise useful, that kind of sharing of knowledge. And yeah, it's nice to have that knowledge exchange and that little bit of peer-to-peer support. So good work.
We will be sharing the word clouds and these lists of suggestions in the slides that we share with you after this session.
Beth, when you're ready, I will take the screen back from you and I will just continue with the last few slides of the presentation. As I understand it from the previous session, evaluation was something that many of you would like more information from information on even. But sadly, I don't have time this evening to cover that thoroughly enough. You know, that's a whole other webinar. But I do have some takeaways for you. Again, these are based on my experiences. So number one, please choose your questions carefully and consider the impact having to answer these questions might have on a person. And in particular here, I'm talking about well-being questions. You want your evaluation to be reflective of your whole project, so please include your team, the stakeholders, the partners, as well as the participants in this. And ideally, you want to be noticing and encouraging participants to notice changes as you go along. So you might record this in photographs or in a shared notebook at the end of each session. You know, there are lots of lovely creative ways in which you can do this. It doesn't just have to be pens and paper and a bit of a rigid questionnaire. And if you do have good relationships with the people and you're likely to be linked with them again, then this might well provide you with that very, very rare opportunity to do some longitudinal evaluation, which is a little bit like hen's teeth, but actually in the past 2 years, I've managed to do it 3 times. Try to include evaluation that records the impact on friends and family, and I'm going to give you an example of this, and this is quite a powerful one, I think. So in 2019, I took an archaeology, identity and ceramics project into Earlstoke Prison, and here we worked for 8 weeks with 10 men. We alternated each week between the artifacts and the archaeology, and then we had the sessions on identity. And we asked the men, in 1,000 years' time, if someone were to dig up a piece of pottery about you, what do you want your story to be? This man created 2 vessels. One he decorated with the same self-harm marks that he has on his arm, and the other vessel is full of holes representing trepanation, thought to be a ritual where holes are drilled into the skulls of ancestors to let their memories out. And that's what he wanted his piece to represent, something that allowed his bad memories to escape. Now in his early 30s, he'd been in prison since 2 weeks before his 18th birthday, and in all of his years inside, ours was the first course he had ever completed. And for him, it was the mix of archaeology, of creativity, and the opportunity to share a little bit of his story that kept him interested. The final ceramics pieces went to Salisbury Cathedral, where they were put on exhibition. And this meant that this gentleman's dad could go and see his son's work on display there, which meant that next time he visited him, he had something different to talk about, you know, something positive, something to feel proud of. So please do not underestimate the impact this type of work can have on the friends and the family of those that you're working with. So what else do I recommend? So the last 2 here. Reflection, ask yourself, what's changed for me? I think it's really, really important to check in with yourself and to understand the impact a project has had on you and to learn from that. And the work I've done in the past at the prison actually is a really good example of this for me. And learning from failure is valuable. No one wants to fail, but we do. And understanding why something isn't working and hasn't worked is just as important as understanding as why it was a success. Okay, last few slides. We're on to the home stretch here, folks. So this evolution diagram pulls together all of the information I've given you over the course of this presentation. This is a live chain. In fact, this is a section of my work chain from the past 4 years, which means it began when I was at the cathedral. So when I was at the cathedral, I volunteered 1 day a week at Salisbury Mind. And this meant that I was out in the community, meeting the people with the lived experience, understanding their needs, and actually understanding that if you have a mental health need, then there is very little support for you here in Salisbury. From this, I worked with a group from Mind and we co-created a pilot project that I ran. We worked with an artist and we used the architecture of the cathedral as our inspiration point. This pilot became a much bigger project. We had a stone carving course. I worked with other third sector organisations. I even held a silent disco in the cathedral for seniors and people living with dementia. And I continued to build upon this work and make lots more relationships across the city. All of this learning became the seed for Well City Salisbury. I had evidence, I could build up a case, and so I brought in those community partners, and Well City started to take shape. And as you know, we got the funding. Now, within Well City, we have a participant steering group, so the participant voice and the co-creation is still present in all that we do. This meant when we went into the first lockdown in 2020, it was this group that I called upon to help me shape a pilot for a digital heritage wellbeing project, which in all honesty, I didn't think would work. But I knew that I had to try something because for members of the steering group and for other people in Salisbury, all of their support systems had all but shut down. As a result of the pilot, I had the evidence and guess what? You can deliver a heritage wellbeing project online. I was wrong. So this meant that when Historic England launched their COVID-19 emergency funding, I had a project concept, I had evidence, I had evaluation, and I had participant co-creation ready to go. We got just under 50 grand for Lost and Found, and the project was born. So Lost and Found exists because 2 years prior to the first lockdown, I met that wonderful group of individuals at Mind, and we created that very first pilot project together. This diagram shows us just where Lost and Found has taken us. So Dig In, I spoke to you about Dig In, and this year we're aiming to host Dig In cafes in Sheffield and in Edinburgh, and another one at the hospital here in Salisbury. I should say that in Edinburgh, we're hoping to partner with a charity cafe there who work in support of people from Eastern Europe. Also in Sheffield, my colleague Natasha has continued to work with Sheffield Mind, who are one of the groups in Lost and Found. And later on this year, I'm going to be working in the Potteries Museum on a funded project around the Staffordshire Hoard, where I'm going to be working with women from the Asian community there. And of course, it is always lovely to get your project in a publication. Lost and Found was in the recent Creatively Minded and Heritage report, which was commissioned by the Bearing Foundation, and in Historic England's Wellbeing and Heritage Research report. And of course, we were super delighted to be finalists in the AHI Awards in their community engagement category. But all of this can be traced right back to that very first moment of community connection, the relationship building and the co-creation of that initial piece of work. And that is what I continue to do with all of my projects. I'm continually checking back in with the community. I'm speaking to the people with the lived experience, and we are building work together because that's what's valuable for them. This is the last slide, and this one is all about you. Looking after yourself. Please do this. Please factor into your projects the time and the resources to look after yourself and the other members of your teams that you're working with. Having worked in the field of community engagement for many years, my head is full of other people's stories. So I've learned how to manage this and what I need to do in order to look after my own well-being. So it's time at the start and the end of the sessions for a wellbeing check-in with your team. You know, that's not with the participants, that's with your team, volunteers, freelancers, etc. Peer-to-peer support, we've done a little bit of that this evening. It's really valuable. It's relatively easy to get in place. If you can afford it, try and get professional supervision in place. You know, if you're writing a funding bid, include monies in there to cover that. It's really, really valuable. And regular training, it goes without saying why that's important. And as we said before, you know, have ways for the team to feedback and be involved in that evaluation process. And get out and about and meet other people who are doing the same good work and feel inspired by this. And celebrate. You know, I said before how important celebration is, and it really, really is. Do take the time to give yourself a pat on the back. You know, we're not the heroes in this story. It's always the participants, but this work takes time and it takes energy, and you should celebrate those moments. The last thing I want to say is just how absolutely wonderful this area of work is. It is so much fun and it is so rewarding. And genuinely, I think I have the best job in Wessex archaeology. And I hope I've given you some ideas on how you might progress the work that you're doing or that you aspire to do in this area. So thank you very, very much for listening. And now it's time for your questions. Back to Tiva.
Fantastic, Lee. Thank you so much. I've heard this presentation about 5 times this week, and yet every time you tell the story about the guy in the prison, it moves me almost to tears.
Yeah,
So we've had some really interesting engagement in the chat, actually, and there are some interesting observations and some interesting questions. There's, I think, a lot of anxiety, as I think the word clouds reflected, about money and endings, and also, you know, how money affects relationships and things. But let's start you with a softball question, Lee. We've had someone who just wants a bit of clarification about what a gatekeeper is.
A gatekeeper. Okay, so the gatekeeper is the person that can gently introduce you to the people in the community who have the lived experience. So let me give you an example. So who do I work with? So I do a lot of work with our community engagement managers. They're employed by Wiltshire Council, and it's their job to know all of the voluntary work and all of the good work that's going on in Salisbury and actually across Wiltshire. So I go to regular meetings that they hold. I mean, I have to be honest, folks, I sometimes go to meetings I'm not even invited to, just so I can hear what's going on in the city. So for example, there's something in Salisbury called Safer and Supportive Salisbury. There are lots of third sector organisations there. So there are lots of community engagement teams. So they're gatekeepers. There are social prescribers and community connectors. They're gatekeepers as well. So it's just the people that can introduce you to the organisation and to the people that you are aspiring to work with.
That's great. Thank you, Lee. I hope that answers the question. I'm going to try and synthesize a couple of the observations and comments that I've seen. One person has said it's really difficult to invest the time when funding is so short term. Someone else has said it's great to hear how the project developed, but as with many successful projects, it began with your free labor. There needs to be funding to do the initial relationship building. And then finally, someone has said it's really inspiring. Thank you. How would you suggest starting discussions about these projects in a commercial setting? And I think those 3 questions are all kind of tied in together with concerns about funding, how we get the funding, how we justify spending our time doing this before we've secured the funding, how do we do it in a commercial setting? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I will talk about that a little bit, yes. So the first thing to say is I was really lucky. Salisbury Cathedral let me volunteer at Mind kind of in work time. So almost on their behalf, although I wasn't spreading the word of religion or God, you know, but I was allowed to do that as part of my job. They felt that that was an important part of what I was employed to do. And that's just something that I have continued to do. And I don't think that's necessarily a big ask for organisations. You know, wouldn't it be great if more organisations allowed their staff to do that?
I would agree there. And I think from the commercial perspective, it's kind of what you'd call a loss leader. I've just been given license to spend a significant amount of time developing a project which might actually secure us 6 figures in grants. So as long as the organization understands that this is something that's worth investing in, and that sometimes I completely appreciate can be a challenge. But the other thing I would say is that a lot of these relationships are personal relationships, and you take them with you when you move. And I would certainly say that some of the projects that I have kicked off in a different role have come from relationships that I established in previous jobs. So don't underestimate the power of actually fostering those relationships. They may pay dividends years down the line, but I do recognize that you need to put in legwork yourself.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it's hard, isn't it? Because I kind of think I think I'm a good case study. You know, what Wessex have done by employing me is that, putting the money where your mouth is. You know, we want to do this work, so we need to invest in a person to make this work happen. And I don't know how rare that is, Tiva.
I think it's pretty rare. I think you and I are pretty lucky in that regard. Nick asks if you could talk very quickly a little bit more about that false end idea to a project. I think you explained that, but there are a few more questions, so I'm going to try and canter through in the next 3 minutes. Go on. What's a false end, Lee?
Okay, I hope it doesn't sound sinister, Nick. I don't mean it to sound sinister. So in my experience, people get to the halfway point, or even like a few weeks before the halfway point, and they start talking about it in the room. Oh, we've only got 2 weeks left. Oh, we've got 4 weeks left. What am I going to do after this? I'm really, really going to miss you all. So I manage that by saying, yes, we have 4 weeks left of this creative session together, but I'm going to invite you all back. We're going to get together again, and we're going to do that, 2 weeks after the course is finished, or 1 week after the course is finished. And we just come together, and usually, Nick, we have cake, there is celebration. If we've created something, we will look back over what we've made, or if I have had archaeologists input into that, they'll come back, and we it's like, let's get the gang back together again. But in those moments, as I said in the presentation, because people have had time to miss it, but not necessarily feel sad about missing it because they know that this moment is coming up when we're all going to get together again, they're quite reflective, and you do get those beautiful bits of evaluation, and people have time to miss it just enough to understand what the gain was for them participating in it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I was always surprised to discover when I started working in engagement was that sometimes the removal of an engagement project, or the completion of an engagement project, particularly when the funding dries up, for example, sometimes that removal can actually be more harmful than the project might have been beneficial in its entire existence, and taking it away actually really aggrieves people. So I think softening the blow in a way by easing them out may be really a good approach as well.
Yeah, and actually, Tiva, just to say, I talk about pathways of progression as well. That's other things, that's other ways for people to stay connected to your organization, and that's why I do Dig In. That's why Dig In exists. So it's just once a month, it's just for an hour and a half. But if you're still interested in archaeology and you still want to stay connected to us as an organization, please come along to the Dig In Cafe. And lots of people who did the Lost and Found project are coming to Dig In, because that's where I can signpost them onto.
And that's actually a really interesting idea for any of us who have volunteer programs. A lot of these people who we encounter in our engagement, particularly for inclusion and well-being, they can sometimes become our biggest champions, and they will work tirelessly for us as volunteers if we'll have them. So it's really important to have that progression sort of pipeline, if you will, so that people know what comes next, what they can do next, even if the money for your projects run out. Just give that a little bit of thought. Right, I'm going to give you one more question, Lee. There's some lovely comments coming in. And this one again may be something that we could spend a full other 90 minutes talking about, but someone has said, out of interest, what kind of challenges do you think are facing engaging with neurodiverse groups? Would you adapt things as you go, or would you build something in at the start?
I would do my best to do really thorough research and consultation and co-creation right from the very beginning. On Twitter this week, it's an awareness week, isn't it? Is it Autism Awareness Week this week?
Neurodiversity Awareness Week.
Okay, so I have watched conversations unfold about people saying how upset they are by this, about some of the language that they've used, that that it doesn't speak for them. And I think the thing with all of this work actually is it is about individuals and how individuals feel, and people are not in boxes and one size does not fit all. So for something like that, I would put in all of that effort and all of that time right at the beginning to do that co-creation. I would continue checking in with people throughout, the end of each session, making sure that everything's okay. And I absolutely would change it if it wasn't working, because that's where all of the learning is actually. And, I don't know, I've kind of mentioned this a little bit, but I am a great believer in a pilot project. Try something out before you launch it out into the universe, and working with bigger groups or more groups of people. Because I think the evaluation and the learning you get from a pilot project is absolutely essential to informing your next steps.
And it will help you in making the case as well, won't it?
For your funding, absolutely will.
Okay. Lee, that is a perfect point on which to stop. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Everybody who's still here, I'm going to give you 2 minutes of closing spiel, and then we're going to share our lovely Lost and Found video with you. Now, if you are pressed for time and you do need to rush off, don't worry, we will share the link to the video with you online. But yeah, thank you all very much for your insights, Lee, and thank you for your questions, everybody. That's been really, really constructive. So what happens next? Well, we at Wessex are thinking about how this webinar might be the starter for our own pilot project. The AAN pilot projects are all about deliberately going out to new audiences and using data and evaluation to better understand those audiences in order to serve their needs. With that in mind, we're trying to think about what our pilot project might look like. Maybe it's taking the next step and working with some of you to develop your own inclusion projects. Maybe it's facilitating an action learning set or a knowledge share or some kind of mentoring scheme. I think knowledge sharing in this particular area is going to be really important going forward, so we stop reinventing the wheel. Maybe it's a targeted inclusion project with a new audience that we haven't worked with before. Lee, I know you've got your eyes on some particular communities within Wiltshire. We don't know yet what the Wessex pilot project is going to be, but as Lee has said, we do need to work towards co-creation here to make sure that we're doing this not to people, but with them. And participant voice, therefore, is going to be absolutely key. Now, if you have any thoughts or ideas about pilot projects, please put them in the chat or in the feedback form afterwards when we send that to you after the webinar. We're really keen to know what you think you might benefit from. In the next few days, we will send you a follow-up email with slides, word clouds, and relevant links. And we will let you know when the subtitled recording of the event goes live on our YouTube channel. Your feedback, it goes without saying, is really important to us. It's going to help us to understand the impact of this webinar and inform what we and the AAN should do next. If you have any particular thoughts on other topics around the archaeology audiences and the data that you'd like the AAN to cover in its webinars, I know some of our partners still haven't settled on what their webinar topics are going to be. So please get in touch, let us know, put it in the feedback form. We do want to know what you think. We're going to leave the chat open for a little bit after the video in case you do want to give us any immediate feedback or if you have any other reflections or observations that you want to make this evening. I can also give you some news about the next webinar in the AAN series. This is going to be run by the CBA and it's going to take place on Tuesday, the 17th of May with, just like MOLA and just like us, there's going to be a session in the afternoon and a session in the evening. Designed for voluntary groups and societies who engage in archaeology and heritage activities, this interactive webinar will look at why data collection is so important for informing idea generation, project design, and fundraising for a range of audiences. So I think it sounds like using data to make the case effectively. Bookings haven't opened yet, but do keep an eye on the CBA's events page on their website. And of course, if you are subscribed to the AAN mailing list, we will let you know through that as well. So I want to say a big thank you to Lee, who I know has worked absolutely tirelessly on refining this presentation in the last few days and has delivered a really inspiring and useful session. And to Beth, who's been our technical backbone throughout the development of this webinar, and I honestly don't know how we'd have managed without you. And finally to Polly, who's led on all of our comms and has done some of the audience data analysis on the back end, not to mention diligently monitoring the chat on VWOX today. So before we show you our video, can I just ask that the team please turn on their cameras so that we can say hello and goodbye. Thank you all very much.
Thank you,
We
everyone.
hope you enjoyed the day or the evening. and we'll see you next time. Beth, over to you for the video.
All right, let's have a look at the video.
A picture is worth 1,000 words, and an object can tell 1,000 stories. Engagement with heritage can have hugely positive impact on our physical, social and mental well-being. This short film will help you to prepare and deliver your own project. In your own project, inclusion is vital. Everyone should have a positive experience. Research is also key. Learn about your participant groups and about the themes that you want to address. Set clear outcomes before you begin and use these to track successes or shortcomings. Some things will go brilliantly and some things will not, and that's okay. If you are running work in partnership, get to know your partners, walk in their shoes, understand who they are and what they bring to the table. You will work better together as a result. Words can be very important, so ask your partners what the right words are. If you want to gain people's trust, show them that you listen to them. If working online, you will be relying on technology, and vital to getting this right is practice, practice, practice. Use a welcome session before the course to allow people to meet and practice. Everyone involved, that's participants and staff, will have questions and doubts, so put their minds at rest, adapt and meet the needs of your groups and individuals. No two are the same. The welcome session will give you an invaluable insight into this. Your technology may also present some defined limitations for users, so decide which will work best for your project. And remember, whatever your project is, it is about people. Ours started with a simple idea: how could we use archive objects to start a conversation between people? We understood that we had two very important resources: archaeological objects and experts who could share the stories behind these finds. The objects were a stimulus to a deeper conversation. If archaeology is about understanding people from long ago through the objects that we find, Lost and Found was about understanding the people we work with through the objects that they chose to share with us. It is important to ask yourself not what is fascinating about this piece of heritage, but rather how can we use this piece of heritage to engage with the lives that we lead today? What is the story that resonates? The people in the room are the important bit. People are fascinated by being given a glimpse behind the curtain. Who made this? How did they make it? Why did they make it? If your project is interactive, build in a flexible structure to allow for the participants to follow their own reactions. They'll probably surprise you. They will react in unseen ways. They will have ideas. They will see connections that you did not predict. And this is where the project will be at its most successful. You must give space for these creative responses, but also you must build bridges for those who need more support. As well as leading work, watch and listen carefully. Part of our project was the setting of tasks to be completed at home. The staff delivering the sessions are part of the group, and the best deliverers make connections alongside participants, not ahead of them. An informal atmosphere can be a huge advantage in fostering a sense of belonging. People admire and respect skill. Your staff will benefit from this if they openly share their knowledge. As with all projects, the most important thing is that people feel welcome and safe. Assess progress when it feels useful, not just at the end. Learn from this and adapt. Check in with people. It is hard to predict what the impact of the work may be. Smaller group numbers allow for more personal impact. People get lost in a crowd and it is harder to follow the flow from the group itself. Think carefully about the length of your sessions. Empower people to make decisions. Don't underestimate the power of this. When the work is drawn to a close, think about afterwards. Could the group go on meeting, with or without you? Signpost participants to other opportunities or support. Have a genuine interest in what the project has meant to them and what they will do next. Celebrate successes. Share your findings and successes far and wide. Your project could be the beginning of another story.